So now I want you to think about the fact that as a person running this business, you're employing people. And this is tricky. I'm sure many of you have had bad experiences being employed. I know my own daughter did when she was working in the catering industry as a student. Sometimes she worked in a shop. You know, you get treated very, very badly. Now, as architects, people are normally treated well. But it's very important to treat people well, or else they won't stick around. They'll go and work for somebody else. So, in terms of staff side of your business, there's the environment. So you just got a new job, and you need to employ 2 people. How easy is that going to be? What's the economy like? What's the labour market? Are there loads of architects out there? Or actually, is there such a fantastic time, it's very hard to recruit experienced people. And then there's legal requirements. So those of you who have worked on 0 hours contracts, etc., will know that, you know, the way in which you set legal entities up makes a difference to who you can attract and how difficult it is to recruit. So then there's the organisation and how it's structured. Obviously, if you're a very small business, you don't really need any organisation. You just need to be able to talk to each other, and that's sort of, if there's only 3 or 4 of you, it's really just fine. Immediately you get to sort of 12, you need a structure, and with Adam's company, I can't remember now if they've got 40 or 50 people, you need a proper structure so there's an understanding of how it all works. You need a strategy. What sort of a firm are you? What sort of a person are you? Are you there just to make as much money as you can? Quite frankly, you just want to be a millionaire and you don't care how you do it. You've got your architecture skills, that's fine. Or are you the sort of person who wants to get in the architectural mags, you want to win awards, you want to develop your architectural philosophy? This is important, and it's important to communicate those objectives and that mission statement to the staff so everybody knows how that works. And having decided it, then you've got to think, how does that affect your business model? And many younger practices, and when I say younger, I mean people who've been going for 10 years, who you will have read about in the mags, haven't made a penny for the first 10 years. They've just managed to pay themselves their salary. They haven't made any profit because they're so passionate about design and spent so long on it, developing their design ethos, that they put making money very much as a secondary. There's operational issues in terms of the way you go about recruiting, training and supporting people. And if you're running a biggish practice, you need to think about career progression. So obviously, in your early years, you're very, very hungry for knowledge. You're on a sort of pretty steep trajectory of becoming more and more experienced and having more and more skills. As you meet your middle years, and you can already run projects, then having some sort of career progression, what's my next stage, is important, or else you're going to get bored in that practice. And that's where development comes in, training and CPD. As we have said in a previous lecture, the thing about architecture is it's never the same. It's always developing. Both the technology, the practice, the Revit, the BIM, all of these things are constantly changing, and we need to continually be retraining ourselves in order to accommodate changes in the market and also to meet our business objectives. So it's not just the profession that's changing, it's the business environment we're working in, which becomes ever more tough, or it did for me in the sector I was in, particularly working for universities like this. Very often you would be bidding to do work, and they would have a matrix, and you would basically get work on the strength of your experience and your price and your skills. And so constantly being reviewed as to how well you're performing. So what are they looking for when you go off your interviews in 6 months' time, or whenever it is, 4 months' time? How are they selecting people for their firm? So it's very, very important when you're running a practice to make sure you get the right people, because if you make the wrong decision, either that person is going to be very unhappy, and that's not good when you're running a business, or you're not going to be very happy with them. They don't have the right chemistry or the right ethos, and it's not very easy to get rid of people just because the chemistry isn't right. If they're incompetent, it's easy to get rid of people, but it's not if you just feel that you're not getting along too well. They will review performance. So that's both your technical abilities and what you can achieve, and they may well set out the standards that are required of you in the practice. If you stay with them for any length of time, they should have an appraisal system, so that at least each year you sit down with the boss or whoever it is and you have a review of how you've been getting on, where they think your strengths and weaknesses lie, where they feel you might need some career development in order to progress professionally. And this is very important, and if you are in a business and you stay there for any length of time, it's good to get feedback, it's good to have this appraisal. And finally, rewards. So obviously we are all there effectively to make money and keep ourselves going and do all the things we want to do outside of work, and the basis of the financial remuneration needs to be fair and appropriate for the skills you have. And you could argue in your early years you're not particularly well paid compared to other graduates, which is very frustrating. All I can say is that in terms of the way in which the business model for architecture works, that's the fee that can be justified in terms of, that's the salary that can be justified in terms of the fee that you can charge clients. So it certainly is a bit tough in terms of starting salaries, but that is the situation. And obviously down in London, it would be a little bit higher than in the Northwest. So a bit of theory for you now, and this is sort of useful for life too. It's very useful to the M-Arch students because they're very often doing group work, and they need to think what's driving the people they're working with, who have they got in their group, what are they good at, and how do you communicate with them. So there's this chappie called Belbin, and I think he was American. Anyway, in the 1970s he dreamed up this way of categorizing people and their attitude to work. And don't worry, Adam.
Morning.
How you doing?
How you doing, yeah?
Yeah, hi, how you doing?
You know Steve?
Yeah, hi Steve, how you doing? Hi Adam. I'll just get to the end of my thing, and then, but I'll literally be 1 or 2 minutes, so perch on the end there. No, actually, I will stop. I was just about to give him a load of bullshit about this. Do you know anything about this, Adam?
You carry on.
No, I'm not going to do that then. Okay, so let me just. Have you got a data stick?
Yeah.
Right, so I'll exit that. And if you want to give us your data stick. Cheers, thank you. It's the smallest data stick in the world. Is it that one, Adam? It looks hopeful. That one? Right, okay. So, as I said, Adam Hall is, are you, are there a lot of number of partners? Are you the senior partner?
There's 4 of us who are...
Equal?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a little bit.
Very coy, a very coy partner from Faulkner Chester Hall. And Thornton Chester Hall do a lot of commercial projects around Liverpool. I must have known 10 members of staff who've worked for them over the years, and they generally do okay in their Part 3s because they get good experience, they have good support and mentoring. And when you look from the outside, you might think it's dead easy running a large architectural practice, and it's easy to make money. But actually, it's also easy to lose money, and as I told you, in the recession, a number of the big Manchester practices went bust. So, as usual, I've got a number of questions for Adam. Do you want to come up the front, Adam? But Adam's an organised chappie, so he's actually had the good grace to produce a little presentation, which last year was brilliant. I don't know if it's the same sort of thing, but
it's a bit more refined. So I could run through that piece if you wish.
Okay, so the spirit of my questions are: what is it like running a big practice? So project yourself forwards. Only 10 years, maybe even 5 years. I mean, how old are your associates, Adam?
They're sort of mid-30s.
Okay. Yeah. So, what are your concerns and challenges? So, what's going on and what's morphing? How do you make sure you're going to actually make any money? How do you nurture staff? Because his main resource is his staff. Does he care about that, or does he just lock them to their computer terminal and tell them to get on with it? And how do you anticipate the future? Those are the questions, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're welcome to sit here, Adam. Why don't you sit in front of the screen? That'll be a bit easier.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
And I'll go and perch on there.
Yeah, thanks. Pete. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's a really big subject, this. And Peter said to me, I've got sort of 15, 20 minutes. I mean, I could probably talk to you for hours about it, and I won't bore you, obviously. But I've tried to distill in these 20 or so slides the points that Peter's raised there. But I'd like to sort of start by just saying to you, I'm sure, I was sitting where you were sitting about 30 odd years ago, and when I was sitting there, I thought being an architect was all about being somebody who designed buildings. And absolutely, that's why we're all in this wonderful profession that hopefully you're all enjoying and you'll continue to enjoy as much as I do. But reality of the fact is that unless you're actually making any money, that lovely career in architecture isn't actually happening. So, yes, design is probably 90% of what you guys are thinking about at the moment, but really, if you're going to make a career out of this, you've got to realise that ultimately it's got to make money. And as my career has progressed, sadly, I've found that less of my time has been spent designing and more of my time is spent actually managing the practice to make sure we do hit those financial targets, make sure the staff are motivated, doing the right thing. So that's what I hopefully will get over in this short presentation. So there's a snapshot of the group of guys that I work with. That's a couple of years ago, actually. That's probably about 40 or 50 people now. We're actually double that size now. So we're at 80 staff across 3 offices, principally in Liverpool, where the head office is, but also in Manchester and London. And we have a small outpost in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia as well. So as Peter just asked me there, that there's a group of us who are the senior team. So myself there, just sort of left of the shot, and the founder of our company, Paul Faulkner, in the middle of the screen there, and then one of the gentlemen to the left of me. We're the 3 principals, and then there's a number of what we call associate directors, who are the sort of next wave of the practice. So the sort of 4 areas that I'd like to try and distill today are winning the work. So how do you actually create the business that keeps the practice prosperous? How do we manage those people producing that fantastic design work? And how do we use systems to actually monitor how the output of the office is done efficiently? And finally, and not lastly, because it is actually the most important thing, how do we make sure we get paid for that work, both in terms of the money that comes in, and how do we make sure that we manage the money once it's in the office to make sure it's being effectively used? So, winning work. So what this is literally how do you make sure those commissions come through the door? And that can happen in architectural practice in a number of different ways.
You know it's tight tape, don't you, Adam?
Yes, yeah. I mean, there are some figures coming up in a minute which they're so small.
That's a good point, actually. I think it even is stream captured.
Yeah.
You sure you're okay with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
I can stop it.
I've doctored some of the numbers, so it doesn't show how profitable we are or not. So competitions, that's hopefully as the name suggests. This is literally where you read about, you're invited to get involved in an architectural competition, and you could be one of 100 practices all competing for the same work. And this is usually how a young practice, when they're just starting out, this is the type of work that would get a young practice going straight out of university, fresh with ideas. They might win a fantastic competition, just as these names might mean something to you, but Richard Rogers, Norman Foster, they won the commission to design the Pompidou Centre in Paris. That was the job that sprung their careers, and now they're both, along with Renzo Piano, some of the biggest names in architecture around the world. Frameworks. So frameworks generally are public sector run propositions whereby an organisation seeks to find probably an architect and other multidisciplinary consultants to work on a series of projects that perhaps have similar content. So it could be, for instance, a series of hospital buildings, a series of police stations, fire stations, and they would look to try and secure the architect to work on a group of projects at a similar defined service and fee over a number of years. Once you're locked in, it's good work, but it tends to be a little bit repetitive, a little bit the same. Tender, again, hopefully as the word suggests, that is simply just submitting your fee for a piece of work, and usually the lowest wins, and I'm not a great fan of that concept because often reduced fee doesn't necessarily equal best service, but particularly when you're working with the public sector, a fee and a lowest common denominator is the target that they're trying to achieve. We're getting into the more interesting scenarios with the next two. Repeat commission is when you've worked for a client, they love what you do, and they say, Adam, really enjoyed the work you did for us last time, would you mind coming back and doing that for us again? That's really nice, you feel great when that happens, and you can usually negotiate a reasonable fee because they've come to you and you're generally not in competition with somebody else. And the best of the lot is a direct approach. So let's say, for instance, you produce a lovely building, it's been advertised in the Architect's Journal, a client picks up the magazine, looks at the building and says, that's the guy that I want to design my next building, and really then that is a lovely experience because you know you've got an empathy with that client straight away. Once you've started to establish yourself, then you need to think about how your work might be defining the philosophy of your practice. So, for instance, as Peter's explained, we call ourselves a commercial practice. We work in the private sector development world, so we do hotels, we do residential, we do commercial offices, we do student accommodation. That's what we specialise in, but you might be a practice that specialises in hospitals or in one-off private houses or in public sector work. The type of work might be something you specialise in. So you might, for instance, be a specialist in refurbishing existing buildings only, or you might be a specialist in bridge design. And your practice, you might decide to take your practice in one of those directions, and by that then you will probably get asked to look at more of that similar type of work. And also a track record, certainly something we try and strive to achieve, is a perception that you get a really highly designed product with each commission that you produce. Some practices put emphasis more on the technical output. We certainly try and combine both a good technical and design output in our work, and that hopefully then generates repeat business. So, second most important thing, managing the people within our practice. I've brought Steve, my colleague, along today. He's part of a group of recently qualified architects who are moving forward through what we call our academy in our practice, and we're hoping to try and encourage those bright stars of the future to stay with us. So creating the right environment, creating the right culture is something that we're really keen on in our practice. So how we manage all that. So in terms of time, we have a software system that I probably spoke to Peter about last year, very complex piece of kit that allows all the staff to input their time as they progress through the projects and things that they're working on within our office. So this is just a snapshot of one of my colleagues from last week, and you'll see hopefully on the screen there that there's a series of days along the top of the bar chart there, and this particular colleague, Alex, has added his 7 hours for each day, and you can see here hopefully that he's put 7 hours for Thursday and Friday against a particular project, and then he also had some study leave on the first couple of days of the week. So that is a way of us capturing that particular colleague's hourly input, and those hours then go into this complex bit of software that enables me and my other colleagues to actually see on a given moment exactly how much a particular member of staff is costing and exactly how much a particular job is costing us. So on this particular project, Gildart Street, not far from here actually, we spent 14 hours last week. I can then see how much that impacts on the actual overall cost of the project. So then we have another snapshot, which is the snapshot into a specific project. And forgive me, this is where this lecture could get it very deeply into the detail. But I wanted to just give you an overview. We work in accordance with the RIBA, the stages of a given project. Peter, have you gone through this?
Yeah, they're fine with that.
Yeah. So we effectively work from 0 to 7, and we attribute predicted time against each of those stages of the project. So you can see numbers building up against the 0 to 7 on the left there, and we enter the amount of money that we're expecting to receive against each of those time stages. We can enter the invoices that we've entered against those time stages. So just as an example, stage 2, concept design, I hope you can see it's about 4 down on the left. We had anticipated a £7,500 worth of fee there. We've actually invoiced that much. So the one to the right is the amount we've actually invoiced. And it's actually cost us, which is very depressing, running 4 to the right, 25,000. So that's not a great start for us. So we will then have to, on this project, recover very quickly and hopefully try and recover the time that we expended on that early stage. So ultimately, the total fee, which for this project is 337,000, we try and achieve a profit. So it means that I can regularly monitor what's gone in, what's coming out, and what we anticipate in the future. So managing time and the costs associated with that is one thing, but we also need to manage the process. And this is probably the bit that is more interesting for you guys. It's the actual managing of the quality of the output. Is the design quality something that we're happy with? So we have a regular series of meetings within our office where we set a series of gateways, and we make sure that at each stage of the project we are monitoring the quality of the design work, or as it moves on to site, the technical piece of work. So again, you can see hopefully here the RIBA stages from 0 all the way through to 7, and each of those stages we have a moment in time when I call in some of my colleagues and we say, right, where's the design up to? We do a little audit, we make some suggestions, and then it moves to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. So hopefully each time we can ensure that the quality of output from the office is in line with our expectations of design and ultimately technical quality. It's very important once it moves onto site stage. So then in terms of the section 3 of the presentation, the management of the office, we've set up a number of protocols within the office to ensure that the systems that we have in place operate efficiently. So the first of those is an office manual. And this is a document that has been in production with us for a couple of years now, and effectively it sets out all the tone of everything that we produce from the office. So that's literally from the colour of every drawing, the line weight, the font size, the drawing scales, everything that you might, when you're producing your drawings, ask yourself, what do we do here? This document is the guide that all my colleagues refer to, and it means that the output from our office is consistent in every single way, and that's something that I feel very strongly about, that it creates then a sense of brand, and therefore the output from Falkner Chester Hall is consistent across every user, even to the point if we have words that anybody who picks up the telephone has to say the same thing. So it's got the right message for somebody who might be that first client who rings up the office for the first time to ask us for a project. And as the office grows, this document will grow as well, and it will enable us to put systems in place for how we deal with the growth of our practice as it comes, hopefully, in time. The government also have a quality standard, and that's ISO 9001. This is very dry. I won't go into great detail about it, but some clients stipulate that if you're going to work for them, you have to have this accreditation. It's a series of systems and protocols that are assessed. We're just going through a period of assessments at the moment, and hopefully within a couple of months we will have the next certified stage of ISO 9001. It's a British standard of quality across not just architects' offices, but all professional services offices. So how we manage our files and our records, I hope you guys are already doing this with your own files, but you've got to make sure you know how to find and retrieve the information that you've spent a long time producing and recording. So we've set up very stringent protocols, so we know exactly where a document that's been created can be found. It saves a lot of time if there's a very clear directive on that. So the broad headings are the BIM information, probably talk about BIM in a minute, the information we get from other consultants, our drawing information, our reports, and our images. That's the broad headings, and then within those categories there's lots of subfolders which enable you to then define more accurately exactly what you've got in each of those folders. So yeah, in terms of computing and IT, again, a massive subject and moving very, very fast at the moment. We are pioneering, well, I say pioneering, but we're very keen on implementing BIM, Building Information Management. I don't know whether you're up to speed with...
I'm sure you've done that, haven't you?
With that?
Yes? No? Good, good.
So this is a 3D format of creating all information about a building. So over 50% of our users now operate on that platform. We do have some 2D drafting as well, but that is gradually becoming less and less across the office. And combined with that, we have all the standard things like word processing, emails, Photoshop, SketchUp, all the things that I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. Almost at the end now. So how do we predict to the future? It's very important that you have a very clear strategy within your business where you're going. We set ourselves a 3-year target last year, and this is the little manifesto that we created. It's all about what we're trying to achieve for the practice in terms of its aims, its aspirations, where we see our culture of the office going, what sectors we want to move into. It does not have any information about our financial targets. Our view was that if we're going to move forward as an office, if we can get all the foundation elements right, the elements and essence of what we're trying to create, then hopefully the financial reward will come if all those other things are working correctly. So we're 1 year in, and so far so good. It seems to be working as we would hope. And then the final section, the most important really, is the fees section. So 3 elements to this. How do you fix a good fee that you know is going to be something that will work for you? How do you make sure you get paid? And how do you make sure that that money flows through the office in a way that keeps particularly your staff being paid? So you can set a fee in a number of ways. You can fix it as a percentage of the construction cost of the project that you've been asked to work on. So that literally is a number that usually is between about 3% and 10% of the total construction cost of the project. So that's the plant, the labour, the materials, the profit and the overheads of a building contractor. The percentage of his or her figure, the architect would take a small percentage of that. And that means that if that project goes up or down in value, your fee also moves with that figure. It's becoming less and less a way of pricing a project, sadly, because clients usually want to know at the beginning of a project, how much is your fee, architect? And I'm finding that usually I'm being forced into the second of these scenarios, which is a lump sum. So you fix on a number, and that number is probably based on precedent, how you felt previously, you've done on a similar project, and you literally have to fix on a number, and you keep your fingers crossed, and you hope that you've worked a number that's going to make sure it covers the costs that you're likely to incur. And then third scenario, is an hourly rate. Very rare. It's the kind of work that you might get asked to do if, say, for instance, you were asked to be an expert witness in a legal piece of work that an architect was involved in, and you could very, very clearly define how many hours you'd spent on that piece of work. It's very similar to the way accountants and lawyers charge for their work, but it is rare. So once we've agreed our fee, then we set our fee out in our engagement letter. So we produce a standard template letter here, which says, dear clients, delighted that you've asked me to help you with your project. We define a little bit about what that project is, so we're very clearly stating what you've asked us to do, design a house rather than a hospital. We clearly define exactly what those roles that we're performing might be, so is it for planning only? Is it for building regulation stage only? Is it just a design service? Is it a service doing construction drawings? We make sure that's very clearly set out. We then set out the fee, whether that be a lump sum, a percentage or an hourly rate. We explain whether there would be any other expenses or disbursements, and by disbursements I mean things that we might pay for on behalf of that client. So we might offer to pay, for instance, for the planning application fee, and then it be refunded to us. If you're a company of a certain size, you have to charge what's called VAT, which is an additional tax on your service, which is reconciled with the government. And then you also need to state what other consultants you might need to engage on behalf of that client to fulfill your role as the architect. And when I have moments like this and I'm talking to young architects, I try and liken the role of an architect to a surgeon performing an operation, and they have to draw on the services of other very, very highly skilled professional people like an anaesthetist, a physiotherapist, highly qualified nurses to help in the process of your professional life. And so we as architects, we are the leader of the building profession, and I'd like you to all go away thinking about this, because architects need to maintain this position of prominence within our field. And we effectively need to bring in those people who are going to help us do our job properly. So they might be a structural engineer, a mechanical engineer, a noise consultant, an asbestos consultant, an innumerable number of people. But we are the people who are advising on these things, and clients expect us to be the person who has a good handle on all those people that come together to make their project work successfully. We agree on when we're going to be paid. We need to make sure we're paid regularly and at key milestones.